Olga Briscorn was born in the late 1960s in a small, unremarkable town in the Russian countryside. Her early years were marred by tragedy and hardship. Her father, Nikolai, was an alcoholic and abusive man, while her mother, Irina, struggled to protect Olga and her younger brother, Sergei, from his violent outbursts. The family lived in a dilapidated house on the outskirts of town, isolated from the close-knit community that shunned them due to Nikolai's reputation. From a young age, Olga exhibited signs of deep psychological trauma. She was a withdrawn and quiet child, often found alone in the nearby woods, seemingly at peace only in the solitude of nature. Her teachers described her as intelligent but emotionally distant, with a penchant for cruelty towards animals that alarmed those who witnessed it. Despite these early warning signs, little was done to address her troubled behavior. As she grew older, Olga's disturbing tendencies became more pronounced. She developed a fascination with death and pain, often inflicting harm on herself and hiding the scars beneath long sleeves. Her only friend during these years was Sergei, who adored his older sister despite her dark moods. Their bond was unbreakable, forged in the crucible of their shared suffering. The turning point in Olga's life came when she was 15. One night, after a particularly brutal beating from Nikolai, Irina attempted to flee with her children. Nikolai caught them and, in a fit of rage, killed Irina before turning his fury on Sergei. Olga, in a blind panic, managed to escape and run to the authorities. Orphaned and alone, Olga was placed in a state-run orphanage, where she became even more withdrawn and detached. The trauma of her past festered, warping her view of the world. She developed a deep-seated hatred for those she perceived as happy and content, believing that they had to suffer as she had. At 18, Olga left the orphanage and moved to Moscow, where she blended into the city's anonymity. She found work as a nurse, a profession that gave her access to vulnerable individuals and satisfied her morbid curiosity. Her colleagues described her as efficient but cold, someone who kept to herself and never formed close relationships. It was in Moscow that Olga began her killing spree. This act of mercy killing quickly evolved into something far darker. Olga started targeting individuals she deemed unworthy of life, those who reminded her of her father's cruelty or her own feelings of inadequacy. Olga Briscorn's victims were diverse, reflecting her unpredictable and deeply disturbed nature. Over the course of her killing spree, she claimed the lives of at least a dozen individuals. First victim is Ivan Petrov, an elderly terminally ill patient. He was Olga's first victim. She ended his life with a lethal injection, initially framed as an act of mercy. Second victim is Anastasia Sokolov, a middle-aged woman who had recently lost her job and was suffering from depression. Olga befriended her, offering support before poisoning her with medication. Third victim is Mikhail Ivanov, a 50-year-old man with a history of domestic violence, reminiscent of Olga's father. He was found dead in his apartment, with traces of a lethal substance in his system. Fourth victim is Yelena Kuznetsova, a young mother of two who met Olga at a community support group. Yelena's sudden death was initially believed to be due to a heart condition, later discovered to be poisoning. Fifth victim is Dmitry Orlov, a successful businessman whose life represented everything Olga resented. She posed as a personal assistant and gradually administered small doses of poison until he succumbed. Sixth victim is Tatiana Pavlova, a college student and Olga's intended victim, who survived the poisoning attempt and provided crucial testimony that led to Olga's arrest. These victims represent only a fraction of Olga Briscorn's horrific acts. Her methods often involved gaining the trust of her targets before methodically administering fatal doses of medication, making her crimes particularly insidious and difficult to detect initially. Her method was meticulous. Olga would gain her victims' trust, often posing as a caregiver or a friend, before administering a fatal dose of medication. She took pleasure in watching the life drain from their eyes, feeling a perverse sense of power and control. Her victims were diverse, ranging from the elderly and infirm to healthy individuals who had the misfortune of crossing her path. The police were initially baffled by the deaths, which appeared natural or accidental. It wasn't until a pattern emerged, traced through the medical records and the presence of Olga at several crime scenes, that they began to suspect foul play. By then, Olga had killed over a dozen people, her actions growing increasingly bold and reckless. The breakthrough came when one of her intended victims, a young woman named Tatiana, survived an attempted poisoning. Tatiana's testimony, coupled with the mounting evidence, led to Olga's arrest. During her trial, Olga displayed no remorse, calmly detailing her crimes with chilling detachment. She claimed that her actions were justified, that she was ridding the world of those who did not deserve to live. Olga Briscorn was convicted of multiple counts of murder and sentenced to life in prison. Her case shocked the nation, sparking debates about the failings of the social system that had allowed her to slip through the cracks. Psychologists who examined her described her as a textbook case of severe antisocial personality disorder, exacerbated by a lifetime of abuse and neglect. In prison, Olga remains an enigmatic figure. She refuses to participate in rehabilitation programs, spending most of her time in solitary confinement. To this day, she shows no regret for her actions, convinced that she was merely an instrument of fate. Her story serves as a grim reminder of the darkness that can reside within the human soul and the devastating impact of a broken system on vulnerable individuals. Olga Briscorn, the infamous Russian serial killer, died in the winter of 2023 while serving a life sentence in a high-security Siberian prison. Officially, her death was attributed to complications from pneumonia exacerbated by the extreme cold. Despite her deteriorating health, Olga had refused medical treatment. Rumors circulated that she might have engineered her own death, been murdered by an inmate or guard, or simply succumbed to the weight of her isolation. Her body was cremated, and her ashes were scattered in an unmarked location within the prison grounds, marking the quiet end of a life marred by tragedy and violence.